On November 24th, a fire in a high-rise apartment in Urumqi, China, killed 10 people and injured 9. At that point, China's zero-COVID lockdown policy had been in effect for more than 100 days. Locked doors and blocked-off entrances meant firefighters couldn't get close, and the fire blazed for more than 3 hours. By the time Urumqi's local government agreed to lift the lockdown in stages, the event had already sparked a fast-growing national protest movement, taking place in at least 15 cities across China. And in each one, you'll see these. Now, using symbols as a sign of protest is nothing new.
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up!
There are the yellow umbrellas used in the Hong Kong protests in 2014 that symbolize the demand for democracy. There's the three-finger salute used by protesters in Bangkok, Thailand in 2014 and Myanmar in 2021 as a rallying cry against oppressive authoritarian rule. And then there's the raised fist, used in some instances as a pledge to fight for working-class solidarity and in others against fascism and racial oppression. Today, protesters of China's zero-COVID policy and President Xi Jinping himself have turned to methods less detectable by heavy government moderation. The most widely used symbol is, visually, the simplest. Across more than 50 university campuses and in at least 15 cities throughout the country, protesters held up these blank sheets of white paper as a tool against the government's control of free speech. Protesters told the New York Times that their use of the blank papers were inspired by a Soviet political joke. A disgruntled man holds up a white piece of paper in the street in protest. When asked why, he replies, "There is no need for words because everybody knows." And some Twitter users pointed out that these white sheets of paper could be memorializing the 10 deaths from the Urumqi building fire. In China, white is a color used at funerals. Then there's this equation. A group of student protesters at Tsinghua University, President Xi Jinping's alma mater, raised pieces of paper showing one of the Friedman equations, which calculate the universe's expansion, or opening. The intention is open to interpretation. Some perceive it as a play on the physicist's last name, which sounds like free man. Others take it as a call for opening up, after China's nearly 3 years of intermittent lockdown. At least one student in Tsinghua also held up this sign. This symbol can be found in one of China's most commonly used social media apps, WeChat, to indicate restricted content or when a message can't be delivered, representing the lengths the government are going to keep the people and their message contained. The protest symbols are not limited to signs. One woman was seen walking 3 alpacas down Urumqi Road, and people have praised this as a clever play on words. In China, there is an alpaca-like creature called the grass mud horse, or Kao Ni Ma in Chinese. Social media users interpreted this word as the homonym for the insult. But these examples don't just symbolize what protesters in China are fighting for now, but what they've been fighting against for decades: censorship. The most notable example of the Chinese Communist Party's use of mass media censorship and silencing of dissent is the infamous 1989 Tiananmen Square protests, where student protesters calling for democracy, free speech, and free press were violently suppressed by military forces. Afterwards, the government tightened its control of the media, erasing the event from Chinese history books and conversations to this day. While protests have grown more common across the country over the decades, the vast majority of demonstrations have been small-scale, with citizens addressing local officials. These current protests have expanded to the world stage and aim directly at top leadership, something rarely seen without extreme consequences. That's why protesters are finding these new, creative ways to express defiance against the system. These symbols achieve the same thing as any other protest symbols. They've reached people around the world with a simple and memorable icon, accessible to everyone. More crucially, they're much harder to censor. Under President Xi Jinping's government, algorithms that automatically pull down sensitive words and viral images from online platforms, combined with citywide surveillance networks that monitor offline movement, make the space for public disagreement with authority little to none. For example, after the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th, internet users began to use signs with May 35 in an effort to get around censorship. Beijing banned that date. And for years after that, clever wordplay became increasingly more challenging to use. Even hidden symbols were found and quickly banned. like this pictogram used in Beijing that looks like a tank rolling over a man. Then, to get around censorship during the height of the Me Too movement, Chinese internet users used the emojis for rice and bunny, which represent the characters used when pronouncing the words me and to, respectively. These symbols don't rely on text, which can be easily identified and taken down. Rather, the meaning to these symbols goes deeper for protesters and the world that watches on. The blank piece of paper symbolizes the idea that when any form of protest leads to arrest or images being blocked by the media, then the only method left is to hold up a perpetually inoffensive white sheet of paper. When initially asked whether the widespread protests would prompt a change to China's zero-COVID policy, Zhao Lijian, a foreign ministry spokesman, dismissed the question. "We believe that, with the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people, our fight against COVID-19 will be successful." According to Zhao, China will continue to fine-tune and modify its measures. Now, some cities have announced an easing of COVID restrictions. Major cities like Chongqing will allow close contacts of COVID patients who fulfill certain conditions to quarantine at home, and Guangzhou, who vaguely announced an easing of curbs. However, due to the booster rate among the elderly at 65%, experts believe dropping lockdown policies would lead to a surge of COVID-19 cases that the country isn't prepared to efficiently tackle. The current count is already reported to be around 40,000 new cases as of Tuesday. In any case, many in China see little prospect of a major change from the zero-COVID policy that President Xi has touted to be one of his political achievements.